Hello everyone, my name's Karina Urquhart and I'm the Executive Director at BIC and your host for this session. Thank you for tuning into this BIC event, which is on the subject of streamlining returns, saving time and costs. This event is kindly sponsored by K&K Publishing, who provide Microsoft certified business software for publishers worldwide. We'll be tweeting about this event using the hashtag BIC Brunch, so do feel free to join in online. Before we get started, just some housekeeping bits. You'll notice that we've muted you all. You can of course unmute yourself, but we ask that you don't. This is to ensure that the sound quality for this event is the best it can be. This is especially important because the event is being recorded. If you have a question to ask our speakers during the Q&A session, which is at the end of this event, please type your question into the chat box at the top of your screen there, or unmute yourself when we get to that section in the session. So, what is a BIC brunch? Some of you will have been to a brunch before, so apologies if I'm repeating myself. Some of you won't have been. So very quickly, there are a series of short live online events that focus on a particular book industry supply chain topic or issue with industry expert speakers. They're all recorded and shared to our YouTube platform, the link for which you can see on the screen there at the bottom of that slide. Further information about all of our forthcoming brunches can be found on our website via the links shown on the screen. Don't worry about jotting those links down. I appreciate they're very long. We'll be sharing the slides later on our website. So if you don't get a chance to make a note of them, it doesn't matter. You'll be able to have access to them later on. So here's an overview of today's session. In addition to the sponsor, we have 3 speakers lined up for you. Alex Milne, Director at the Hungerford Bookshop, Ray Webb, Client Development Manager at Hachette UK, and Simon Parker, Business Development Manager at Batch Limited. As I've already said, there's a 10-minute time slot allocated at the end of this session for any questions that you may have. But yes, please do put questions as and when you think of them in the chat box. So BIC, who are we? Some of you will know who we are very well. Some of you won't. So for those who don't already know, BIC is a UK-based, not-for-profit members organisation at the heart of the book industry, creating standards, best practices and resources that form part of the DNA of your supply chains, helping your organisations become more efficient, save money, become less wasteful and hopefully, ultimately, greener. At the cornerstone of the book industry, we hold a unique position of trust, facilitating UK and international industry-wide collaboration to reach agreement on dependable standards and best practice in the supply chain. Amongst many other activities and initiatives, we publish a series of short, informative papers, or crib sheets, if you like, on a variety of industry standards and best practices, known as BIC Bites. Given the topic of today's event, I thought I'd share another really long link with you, and that is a BIC Bite. It's free to use. You can print them out or not print them out or read them on screen, however you like, on the BIC Industry Returns Initiative, which is the topic we'll be discussing today. Excuse me, I have a frog in my throat. So what is the BIC Industry Returns Initiative, I hear you ask? How did it start and why? Commonly known in the industry as IRI, this initiative had its beginnings way back in 1998. I was frightened to work out that was actually 23 years ago. Scary. When the UK's book industry commissioned a report from KPMG called Unlocking the Supply Chain's Hidden Prize. This report was charged with identifying the opportunities available to the UK book industry in order to reduce operating costs and increase service levels through improved supply chain management. Now, time for some interesting numbers. Amongst many other things, the report found that in the UK book supply chain, returns alone bearing in mind this was in 1998, cost the industry about £100 million a year. The report also found that on average, in terms of inventory management, there were more than 60 weeks stock in the system, and that there was substantial stock wastage. So that's over a year's worth of stock held in the system. Amongst many recommendations by KPMG for an improved and more efficient supply chain was that there should be an industry-wide initiative to improve returns handling. The report stated that a concerted and coordinated programme could substantially drive down the costs of returns to the industry and could deliver benefits of £36 million. A simpler monitoring and authorisation procedure would be key to all of this, as well as improved forecasting, planning and supply strategies. KPMG estimated that this could help to bring down returns by 1/3 from the 1998 level of 54 million units. And this saving assumes redesigned processes, and the handling costs would also be reduced by 25%. So this all leads on to where the Industry Return Initiative comes in. So an initiative that is in summary, and very much summary, made up of the two following main elements. The IRI rulebook, that in turn enables automated returns authorisations. Now, obviously, there's a lot more going on behind the scenes than just those two things, but they're the key pieces of this, if you like. And essentially, IRI is an ongoing collaboration between booksellers, publishers and distributors to improve the management of overstocks and other forms of returns by agreeing rules and implementing automation. The IRI standard is managed and maintained by BIC and in collaboration with its members. BIC's IRI review group meets regularly to monitor and progress that standard, address any issues and ensure it continues to reflect current industry needs. In fact, the IRI documents were recently extensively reviewed back in 2018 by BIC and its members to ensure that they're still fit for purpose. There was some clarification work done, although the rules themselves are still as originally agreed at the launch of IRI. So today's session will provide an overview of the benefits of automating book industry returns via IRI, how IRI can greatly benefit businesses by reducing costs and saving time and resources across various strands of work associated with returns. We'll also hear how automating the returns processes is controllable and can be adapted to suit changing business needs. So now we move on to the section dedicated to our sponsors. So I'll invite John Lawson, Managing Director of K&K Software UK, to say a few words. Over to you, John.
Lovely. Thank you, Karina, and good afternoon, everyone. As Karina has already said, returns are an integral part of the book industry, and now more than ever, it is critical that efficient processes are put in place to optimise cost, wastage and resources. Today, you will hear from experienced professionals in different areas of the supply chain. They will be discussing how efficient returns management helps to free up staff time, improve stock planning and reduce potential for returns-related disputes. But first, what I'm going to do today is give you a small presentation about who we are and what we do, as I imagine there are some of you on this call who will be hearing the name K&K for the first time. After that, we will jump straight into the main crux of the webinar and hand over to our panel of speakers who are much closer to this important topic than I am, and how the industry handles returns today. So let's get started first with a little bit about K&K. So as the first slide says, we are software solution providers for publishers, media companies and book distributors. Our core solution is called K&K Publishing, and this is complete end-to-end software with rich functionality for handling the front-end publisher processes from ideation of a book or a project to final product, but much more topical for today is it handles the full sales and distribution processes thereafter, which obviously include invoicing and accounting. The reason why K&K were interested in sponsoring this BIC Brunch is because returns are an integral part of our solution. So we have a team in the UK, and we are an international company established for over 30 years. We've got offices in Europe and North America, plus of course nowadays we've got 100 or so home offices because most of us are working from home. We develop and sell the software. We provide the consultancy and project services to implement the software, and we provide ongoing support to our customers once they are live. Across the group, we have about 180 employees. So that's a sort of somewhat brief overview of who we are. Let me now finish just with a little bit about what we do so you're clear about who K&K is. So these on the screen here are the major products we have available, plus we have a few other things which complement these. But this is generally at a very high level what we provide from the K&K publishing suite. So starting from the left-hand side, we have the core modules that a publisher needs. So, for example, title management, marketing, rights management, editorial, production, and we also handle all of the author royalty processes. So we have solutions for publishers and media companies who also handle paid content, subscriptions, and also media companies that handle advertising bookings. As I mentioned before, our core solution covers the full sales life cycle from order to cash, and naturally that needs to feed in directly to financial accounting, which it does. Okay, so I think that's probably enough about us as a sponsor for today, because obviously you joined us to talk to the experts. If any of you are interested in discussing your specific requirements, here are my contact details, or you can go to knk.com. And on that note, I will hand back to Karina, and then she can introduce the first speaker. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, John. And thank you to K&K Software for sponsoring this event. So as John says, we are now moving into this section of the webinar session where we're going to hear from 3 organisations that are using or are providing systems, excuse me again, that facilitate the use of IRI. So first up, we have Alex Milne. Alex is director of the Hungerford Bookshop and is going to talk to us today about a small bookshop's experience of IRI and the positive changes it has brought to his business. So over to you, Alex. Let me just get your slide up.
Thank you very much, Karina. Hello, everyone. So firstly, a slight apology to Karina. I'm generally known as Alex Milne-White. Alex Milne was my previously, but I never told you that, so no. I can't blame you for not knowing that. Very brief background to me. I've been in book selling for 27 years. First 12 years at Waterstones, where I was generally quite a lot involved in returns, and then the last 15 years at the Hungerford Bookshop, where I also did the returns, and I was also involved in the review of the IRI stuff in 2018 that Karina mentioned earlier. So I'm here to talk about how we do returns, really. So to talk about that first, we need to talk about where we actually get our stock from. And the reason to mention this is because other independent bookshops do this differently. I'd say there's a good amount that do it as we do. We see reps from publishers, kind of all the big non-academic ones. So we end up getting most of our, well, almost all of our new titles from these 5 suppliers, and then we replenish daily to gardeners. The reason for replenishing to gardeners is we're a small bookshop. We only tend to keep 1 or 2 of most titles. So we really need to, the next day replenishment that we can get from gardeners. We do occasionally top up from the original publisher, but most of the time it is through gardeners. A lot of other bookshops, particularly newer ones, seem to get almost everything from the wholesaler. I was going to say one of the wholesalers, but actually there is only one wholesaler now, obviously Gardner's. And this certainly has its advantages when talking about returns, because you can basically say, well, everything I've got from Gardner's, so I can just gather whatever I want to return, send off a thing to Gardner's, and that's it. Much easier than the way I do it, where I have to go to five different suppliers and Gardner's as well. But the problem with that from a returns point of view is that you only get a certain percentage of what you sell is sale or return from Gardner's, usually between 5 or 10%. So that limits you somewhat, obviously, and their returns window is smaller. With most suppliers, it's 3 months to 15 months, as per the IRI general rules. But with the wholesaler, it's 3 months to 12 months, because obviously they need time to get stuff back to the supplier as well. So they've got a smaller window. And the way it works, obviously we're not really that interested, but Gardner's, the way the returns work is pretty similar to Batch, slightly less advanced, and they don't have their own labels. But apart from that, it's a pretty similar method. So what happens next? We need to work out what we want to return. So this is a screenshot from what used to be Bertline, but is now Batchline. So there are loads of different reports. You can see some of them on the left there that you can run on Batchline. It's taken me a long time toing and froing with Bertline, Batchline support to get a report that actually does what I want. But finally, I've got one that means I can run one report for each supplier I'm returning to, and that will tell me everything that I kind of want to know. So first, I tell it I want things that haven't sold since a certain date. And this date is entirely at my discretion. I could make it more recent, but then I'd be getting things, that might still have a good chance of selling. I don't want, really, generally, I want things that haven't sold for about 3 months. That's kind of what we consider to be on the verge of being sort of dead stock almost. Not dead in terms of being returnable, but dead to us in terms of not selling anymore. Obviously, there are a lot of exceptions to this. I'll come to that in a second. Then I would tell the report, obviously, which supplier. I've chosen Hachette in this case because Hachette are involved in this. And then the last thing is actually to do with the returns window. So obviously, you don't want things that are going to be too new to be accepted, and you don't want things that are going to be too old to be accepted by the publisher. It took a long time for me to get a last delivery date before something. So these reports would come out and there'd be loads and loads of titles that there was no point in picking because I knew they were too old. Well, not that many, but so this report is kind of tailored to what I want. It'll give me a list of things, and then I can go and pick them from the shelves, as in the next slide. And there's kind of two ways. There are very much two ways of doing this. You can either go and collect the books first, or you can just take your list and send it off, get them authorised first, and then pick them once they've been authorised, which might sound like the more logical way of doing it. And it took me a minute to actually think why we do collect the books first. And partly it's just because it's the way I've always done it at Waterstones and in my own shop. But also, I find it easier to collect the books from a list, and then when you're getting ready to send them off to Batch, all you've got to do is zap the individual books. Whereas sending off ISBNs can be a bit more complicated, or there probably is an easier way around. But also, it's easier this way around, works better when you come to the point where you've got some unauthorized books, because you have to do something with those. I don't just sort of give up on them and say, oh, well, never mind. I try and find why they've been rejected and maybe send them off somewhere else, try and send them off somewhere else. So there is a method to my madness. So off I go and picking the books from the shelves. And then once I've collected them all, I go on to the next stage, which is just basically we've all got zappers in our shop for sales and other things and booking in. So once you've got all your books together, you just zap each one onto batch, onto the website, and then they just come up in a list on the screen. And then zap them all, amend quantities as necessary if you've got more than one of things, get them all together, and then you accept it and you say, yes, I want to send this list off to batch. And then what happens next is you wait for the authorization. And then after that, you wait a bit longer. And depending on the supplier, this can take a while, but most of them are quite good. Hachette and Macmillan and HarperCollins are usually pretty quick. Others can take a little bit longer. But when that comes through, you usually get an email telling you it's come through, and then you go back into batch and you can print the picking list. This isn't exactly what the picking list looks like. This is the screen on batch you get before it. I didn't have any ready to go at the time, so I couldn't get them up, but it gives you a list of basically title, ISBN and quantities. So, and also it gives you, at the end, it gives you the list of the ones that haven't been authorized. So you've already got your book. In my case, you've already got all the books you've picked at this stage. So all you've got to do is, as in the next slide, you can pick out all the books that have been authorized. Or actually, with most suppliers, it's easier to do it the other way around. Pick out from the books you've gathered the ones that haven't been authorized, and then you're left with the ones that have been authorized. The only time this doesn't really work is with Penguin Random House and GBS. They tend to split what you've authorized into two different groups, sometimes because they have red boxes which are going to be destroyed and green boxes that aren't. So at this stage takes a lot longer in those cases, unfortunately, but we have to deal with that. And then so you've got a big pile of books that you can return, and then you've got the ones that you can't. And I'll come on to a bit more about those later. So going back to the ones you have authorized, you go back onto batch, and you just need to change any quantities that have been authorized but you're not sending. Now, the way we do this, it doesn't really happen very often. It is important, very important for the supplier that you do this, because it gives them the third message that tells them exactly what they are getting back from you. So it isn't always what they've authorized. But if you've collected the books first, then the only reason anything would change is if somebody's decided they want to buy a book that you've already picked for return. And actually, this is surprisingly common. As I say, it tends to increase their desirability for some reason. But other than that, that's all you need to do at this stage. And then once you've done that, you go on to the next bit, which is putting all the books into a box, or into, in a lot of cases, several boxes. Now, this is, I consider this a bit of an art, actually. It's almost like doing a slightly complicated jigsaw. You want to, you kind of want to get in a decent amount of books in the boxes, not too many, as I explain in the next slide, but you kind of, it's difficult. You want to lower your own costs by not having too many parcels to send, but at the same time, you don't want the books to be over full so that a courier can't lift it, and you also don't want there to be risk of them getting damaged on their way back to the publisher. So you don't want to overfill the boxes. And then once you've got them all in the boxes, you know how many boxes you're sending back. So you go back onto batch, and the last thing you do is you say, yes, I'm sending these now, and you ask it for some labels. So it'll ask you how many boxes you've got, so you say, and then you get these labels to put on your boxes. And as I think Ray will come to when in the next session, these labels are very important to the supplier, so that you can actually get your credit, because if you don't put these labels on, then things get lost. But Ray will talk about that in more detail when we come to him. But I don't personally, if you're using batch, I don't know why on earth you wouldn't use these labels, because it saves you writing one out yourself, and it's just the obvious thing to do. So then lastly, you've got your labels on, so you just use your chosen parcel courier to send the boxes back to the supplier. We use Gardner's own one because it's just slightly cheaper and easier, as they come to us anyway. And then after that, you're just left with your pile of non-authorised books, which you've then got to decide what to do with. Now, obviously, I don't really throw them over my shoulder. There are quite a few reasons why they might not be authorised. Sometimes it's just because they didn't actually come from that supplier. The report on Batchline is pretty good, but sometimes it gives you books that you have at some stage got from, say, Penguin, but you've got them far more recently from, say, Gardner's. So Penguin will say, well, we didn't send you that, or not recently, and fair enough. So then I'll put it on a sort of kind of spreadsheet to send off to Gardner's at a later date. But then some of the other messages you get are things like distributor unable to authorise. And those are the really annoying ones, because it's just so much easier to do them all at once. So the publishers in this case will say, oh, it's okay, the rep can authorise them, and that's right, they can. But then you'll be sending another box to the same supplier you've just sent the previous box back to. So that's costing us extra money. So as you see in the next slide, it's not quite this extreme, but ordering books from publishers who aren't on batch does cost us money, and it costs me quite a bit of time, because the slowest part of this whole process is actually dealing with the non-authorized books, depending on the supplier. With Macmillan and Hachette, there hardly are any ones that aren't authorized, or if they aren't, or they are not authorized, it's for a good reason. Whereas the other ones, you get this problem, and you really do have to think about whether it's worth your while or not, whether it's more trouble than it's worth ordering from people who aren't on batch. And on that note, I think I'm finished.
Great. Thank you for that, Alex. It seems that from what you've said, the IRI process, the whole the setup using batch, etc., just gives an all-round improved process. Do you have an idea of? Can you remember what it was like before IRI?
Well, I was at Waterstones at that stage, so we kind of had our own processes to deal with that, especially when we had our own central hub and all that nonsense.
Yeah.
But definitely IRI has helped, and I don't know what it was like as an independent bookshop doing returns before, but I have a feeling it was much more long and drawn out and complicated, and I suspect that almost everything was authorized by a rep, which will have led to a lot of small boxes going back to a supplier instead of just one covering them all.
Yeah, and then the knock-on effect of that further into that sort of reverse supply chain, if you like, the impact on the distributor, the publisher, the accounting, the credit, everything. Yeah. But also,
I'm sure credit is much quicker this way.
Yeah, and the IRI standard as well just enables you, I guess, to dedicate more time to selling, which is why you opened your bookshop in the first place.
Well, quite, absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you for that. You'll stay on, won't you, if there's some questions at the end?
I will.
Thank you. Brilliant. So that then brings us on to our next section. And next up we have Ray Webb. Ray is the Client Development Manager from Hachette, and he's going to be talking to us today about Hachette's experience of IRI, of automation, of why standardization is a good thing, and the impact of IRI in their returns area, a little bit about volumes, a bit about the process, and dare I say it, what can go wrong. And then a bit at the end about what actually happens to the actual books when they are actually returned to them. So without further ado, I will hand over to you, Ray.
Thank you, Karina, and hello, everybody. So my name is Ray Webb. What's a client development manager? Well, in our terms, my role is to liaise with all our current publisher clients and potential new ones. Hachette UK distribution is a new distribution company. We opened our state-of-the-art site in Didcot in 2018, and it is the result of merging our two previously independent distributors, which was LBS and Bookpoint. If you go to the next slide, please, Karina. So I'm sorry, that's a really, really poor pun, but I'm not going to make any apologies for it. So IRY. All distributors of any size rely on standardization. We are about volume, and I'll give you some ideas. In peak, we ship probably between 260,000, 300,000 units out of our site per day for around 20 odd publishers. Customer wise, we have worldwide about 30,000 trade customers and similar numbers just in the education market as well. So you're talking 60,000 plus customers that we have to try and keep happy, and with those volumes. And so standardization is one of the most desirable things we can have. It brings efficiencies, gives us the opportunity to automate things, and our warehouse, a lot is automated. So that in turn will allow greater speed, and it's less prone to error if you can automate something. And this is a reflection all the way across our business, all the way across the processes that we run. And IRI as a standard is a major contributor to that, because returns, let's be honest, are, and this is a technical term, messy. It's one of the messiest area of the business that we actually have. So the more standardization and automation we can do, the easier it is. I think from a customer's perspective, the fact that if your publisher, whoever they are and whoever distributes them, is working within the IRI, you have a set standard of rules. So that removes some of the complexity. You should know the value of a credit before it's actually raised, which gives you a bit of transparency, and everything should happen more quickly. If I could go to the next slide, please. So here's a couple of photographs of our returns area. These actually, it's really tidy at the moment, because although I was tempted to give you a photo of it being messy, professional pride wouldn't allow me to do that, so I waited for a neat one. But you can see that, I mean, that stretches quite a way. There are a lot of parcels there, a lot of different shapes, sizes, pallets, and the cartons that books come back to us will be whatever the customer has available at the time. So we will get Macmillan's cartons, we will get HarperCollins cartons, we get cartons from Gardner's and from everywhere else, and they'll all be different shapes and sizes. So let's just sort of give you an idea so you can visualize what it looks like over the course of a year. If I could have the next slide, please. So we take about 1,000 returns requests a week from batch. So if we had to manually process them, that's, you know, I haven't done the exact sums, but I think you're talking 1.5 people probably a year would be needed just to manually key that. And we're taking in about 60 pallets of returns a day at this time of year, which is an incredible amount of pallets, really. And you have to bear in mind that, okay, so some of the very large customers will be sending us back pallets of their own, so that they're relatively tidy. It's not unusual for us to receive 10 pallets a day of mixed returns from various publishers, from various customers, sorry. So if you as a bookshop send us back 2 cartons and you send it, say, via DPD, maybe 50, 60 other bookshops across the country have done the same on the same day. So we will receive those 10 pallets mixed, and your cartons might be, one carton might be on the 3rd pallet and one might be on the 8th pallet. And so that's kind of bringing back into what Alex was talking about in terms of the label. This is part of the reason why the label is so important for us to be able to identify that actual return. If I could have the next slide. So I'm going to talk very quickly through this this process. So we receive the request via Batch. Batch sends it straight into our system, which then applies the IRI rules and sends a message back telling Batch what is authorised, what isn't authorised, and the reason why it isn't authorised. And that will then appear in that customer's view of Batch. So you create the return. Hopefully you send us back the 3rd message. The 3rd message being, actually, I know I requested 10 copies, but in reality, I'm only going to send you back 7. And that would update our systems. And I'll explain why that's important in a minute. So you send the 3rd message and then you send the books. We receive the goods, and then when we sort that pallet, what we will do is we will scan the RAN returns authorization number, which is part of the label that you would have, which has a barcode on it, and we scan that, and then that opens the RAN on our system and tells our guys exactly what they are expecting for that RAN. Then they will scan the books individually within that RAN, and that will just sort of count off against each other. So I'm expecting 10. Here's the first one, here's the second one, here's the third one, etc., until we get to the completion of that RAN. Because it is not unusual, I'm sure you've some customers have experienced this the other way, where you get a split shipment. So one part of returns receives one day and the next comes the following day. That happens with returns as well, and it's not unusual to receive box 1 on day 1 and box 2 on day 3. So the RAN stays open on the system until, and in our rules, until we've had 95% of what we've expected, and once we get to that, we kind of deem that it's not going to stay there anymore, or there's not going to be any more coming in on that. So that's scanned. So if that first box has arrived, we scan it, and there's a second box being waited for. We will wait for that second box before we close that RAN. Of course, if we had a third message telling us we weren't expecting those other books, it wouldn't stay open, but that could actually delay the credit. So, and from there, once the RAN is complete, we will put the books away or dispose of them how we've been instructed to in that particular case, and raise the credit for the customer. Next slide, please, Karina. So what can go wrong? Well, lots can actually go wrong, but I thought I'd just pick out the two of the major ones, because I think they affect both ends of this particular supply supply chain. So failure to use the label and include the RAN on the box number is an incredibly hard thing for us to resolve. We won't be able to identify that box when it comes back in, and if we can't identify the RAN, we can't identify the customer. We still have to process it because we are obligated to our publishers to control their stock. So if we receive something, we will still process it. But what would happen if we didn't have that RAN number is that particular return would sit in an unidentified returns area waiting for further action. And that can lead obviously to customers calling us and saying, I haven't received my credit for a particular return. And if that happens, what we then have to do is locate that return amongst all the unidentified ones that we've had. So sometimes we will ask you for a proof of return, and that's not because we don't believe you've really sent it back to us. It's because we need some help in actually identifying when it actually came back to give us a little bit of a chance to find it. So that will create a delayed credit, and that's probably guaranteed that if we don't have that label, you will get a delayed credit. And the second thing I've picked out is the failure to use the third message. Reasons I've said before. The RAN on our system is telling us what we're expecting back from that particular return. The third message should be more accurate, would be more accurate than the original request. So if you're not using the third message, then the assumption that we'll make is that you are returning everything you requested. So again, in that scenario where you may have requested 10 but actually only sent back 5, that will delay your credit because we'll still be expecting those other 5 books to come back. A second consequence of that is a RAN will stay open, i.e. if it hasn't been, if we haven't started to process it, it will remain open and available for use for 3 months from the date that is requested. So if you put in a RAN request and you get an authorization for your 10 copies, but then you don't send them back, as far as we are concerned, we are still expecting them. Therefore, if you then, say a month down the line, decide you did want to return some but raised a new request, your outstanding request would still be used in part of the calculation for what you were allowed to return or not. So you could end up getting a rejected message because you hadn't closed or sent the third message on a previous RAN. Hope that makes sense. So that, again, delays. And the final slide, please, Karina. So I thought it would be interesting to tell you what happens to books when they do come back. We do try as much as possible to save them if they are in. Well, the first thing we would do is check the condition of the book, and where they're mint, they should go back in stock. Binders packs would always go back into stock, but various conditions for putting a book back into stock, but it has to be resaleable, obviously. And then there's what we do with everything else which isn't resaleable, and there are kind of 3 channels that we have for that. We some books get donated to charities such as Book Aid, which is a good thing, so they're getting reused. Sometimes if it's a minor damage or the book isn't market sensitive, then it could end up going into a remainder channel. And then the bit that no one really likes is what's left would go down the pulp route. So they would actually get pulped. And what we would do is we shred books on site, bail them up into shredded bales, and pass them on to a pulp merchant who would recycle that paper. In fact, we actually do the same with CDs and the jewel cases that they come in. We crush up the plastic into small, like crystal type flakes and balls and things, and they go to a plastic recycler as well. In fact, within our organisation, I was mentioning earlier, maybe 10 years back, we were probably putting the equivalent of 9.5 African bull elephants into landfill every year. We don't put anything into landfill these days. We recycle pretty much everything. And that concludes my session. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ray. Yeah, fascinating hearing those volumes. I can't imagine, well, I mean, you may be able to tell us what the impact of having, and maybe we should save it for the Q&A session, but the impact, what would your world look like if there wasn't IRI? Or maybe that's something you don't want to think about. And just with the 60,000 customers, I imagine it would be horrendous. And it's great to see that you're your organisation's a great exponent of standardisation. That's what BIC is all about. That's what we also agree with you on. Transparency and credit is another good reason to go down the IRI route. And again, to re-emphasise, as you've already said, now, as Alex has already said as well, is the importance of the use of labels, the RAN number, and the third message. And it's reassuring to hear what happens to the return books as well. And the 9.5 elephants analogy is brilliant. A strange image in my head now.
Yeah. Can I say no elephants were actually harmed in the making of that presentation?
Yes, that's good to know. It's reassuring. Okay, thank you for that. So moving on then. So our next speaker, our last but by no way means least speaker, takes us to Simon Parker, Business Development Manager at Batch Limited. Simon's going to talk to us about how Batch can help remove any system or technical barriers to organisations wanting to adopt the IRI standard or the process. So over to you, Simon.
Thanks, Karina. Hello, everyone. As Karina said, I'm going to talk about Batch's involvement in the Industry Returns Initiative. I'll explain why Batch became involved in the returns process to begin with. And there are benefits to both booksellers and publishers using the IRI, and I'm going to show you how easy that can be to do using Batch. So next slide, please. BIRI, as before the Industry Returns Initiative. I just want to talk a little bit about that because it explains why we got involved in the first place. Returns are often reliant on a visit from a publisher rep who would agree a list of returns with the bookseller. But what that would mean is that piles of returns would build up, usually at the back of the bookshop, waiting for the next visit from the rep. And I could go into more detail there, but it's quite a long-winded process. Once the returns were sent back, it still could take 2 to 3 months before a credit was received. And what we found when we were starting with trying to get people to use the batch payment system was that some booksellers were reluctant to use that because it wouldn't allow them to deduct the value of returns that they were due to be credited at some point in the future. So we realized that there was a direct link in the efficiency of returns and the use of batch payments. And back at that time, the IRI group was planning to launch the process using just EDI. I think that was because the talking had taken a long time. So they wanted to get it moving. And the easiest way was to just stick with EDI with large retailers, and then with a plan to introduce a website which would allow all bookshops to use the process and do that at a later date. Well, BATS decided to build a web interface to allow all booksellers to begin using the process right from the beginning of the IRI, and it was purely to overcome the objection from some bookshops that they couldn't do batch payments because they wanted to deduct their credits for returns straight away. So the website not only allows booksellers to create and send returns requests, view responses from suppliers, send confirmations of what's being returned, and print labels to go on the boxes, it also provides a tool for the publishers to manage their requests from their customers. I've got a note here that I have to explain the abbreviations I'm going to use. So here's a couple I prepared earlier. RETINS, which is a message used in the process. This is short for returns instruction, and this is the message from the supplier back to the bookseller that contains the RAN, which is returns authorization number. It has been mentioned before. But the RETINS is also referred to as a second message, or the authorization, and that's even when all the lines are refused, but that doesn't happen very often. Back to the presentation. Because the batch returns website and the EDI routing service are fully integrated, it means that a bookseller can send in an EDI request, for example, and a publisher could view that request on the website. They could build a response and send a RETINS message with a RAN back to the bookseller. The RETINS message is sent from the website, translated to EDI by batch, and then sent back to the bookseller's system. The batch system allows web to web, web to EDI, EDI to web, and EDI to EDI messaging. Next slide, please, Karina. So, so having batch sat in the middle of the process makes using the IRI very easy. All the IRI suppliers are available on batch. Booksellers, they can register for the service, and batch will contact all the suppliers, notifying them of a new user. They can then use the website or EDI. Batch integrates with most popular bookshop POS systems, as all messages are sent to and picked up from batch. There's no requirement to do testing and setting up multiple EDI connections with lots of different suppliers. Requests made to suppliers with automated EDI responses will often be responded to within an hour. Not all of them, obviously, as Alex pointed out so dramatically with his skeleton waiting for the answer to come back. The IRI rules, they're established in the book trade, which means that booksellers know when they can return request returns, and publishers can manage the process in a cost-efficient way with full control over what can and cannot be returned. If a publisher is not using the IRI, it causes a lot more work, both for the booksellers making the request, but also the publisher's distributor dealing with the returns outside the IRI, as Ray pointed out. On the next few slides, we can see the process for booksellers and then suppliers using batch returns. So next one, please. This is the basic returns process. Bookseller creates a request, type in the ISBNs, or scan them in, paste them in. They can adjust the quantities, then send that to the supplier, get the response, print off a label, confirm the return. When you're logging onto the website, this is a dashboard. You can access all the areas there. This is a bit where you scan in the ISBNs and the quantities, get the answer back, click on the RAN, and confirm what you're going to send back with that label. This is the supplier screen. Return requests produced by EDI or on the web can be viewed. Create the authorization using the batch web application and receive a confirmation telling you what's been sent. This is the dashboard. Shows the activity, the request that is used to build the response there. Functionality of the web application makes it easy to manage the requests quickly with features like setting all lines to the same discount, calculating the price automatically, the authorize all button, or if you're having a bad day, the refuse all button. And then once you've built that authorization, you just click send and send that back to the bookseller. And that was my sprint through IRI returns. Thanks for listening.
Excellent. Thank you, Simon. And that was, I remember the days before IRI very well. My days at, too many years ago when I was at Penguin. But it's good to see that Batch is able to provide what would seem to be a seamless process, quite a speedy process with the obvious exceptions. And again, a recurring theme, I think, of transparency, cost efficiency, and just thinking about if you're not using IRI, the amount of extra work that's involved, not just for you maybe as a retailer, but for other organisations all the way through that supply chain, right the way through to credit control, etc.
Absolutely.
So it's a bit of a no-brainer, I would say, to use IRI. Yeah, so
Indeed.
Do you have a sense of, would you say most organisations are using IRI? What sort of sense of scale do you have?
It's a bit difficult because I tend to see all the people that use Batch, or I interact with them. But my impression is that a lot of bookshops, a lot of booksellers use the returns process, partly because they just want to, and it makes sense to them, and it's easy. But in some cases, they were initially driven there because the distributors said, you've got to send this electronically, and this is the way to do it, and pointed them towards Batch. So, but I do get a lot of, if I do get comments, and when I do see booksellers, it's always they focus on the suppliers that aren't on Batch, and in some cases there's still a few, even the distributors that are participating in the IRI. In most cases, their client publishers are participating, but there are still some publishers that are outside, and then the message they get back in the returns authorization message is that distributors unable to authorize. Then I think Alex mentioned this, and then you've got to then contact the publisher direct. It's a lot of extra work, and I think that it's worth reviewing that if you're one of those publishers, because if you speak to your distributor, I'm sure they can explain that they're not losing control, and it just makes it much more cost effective.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my next questions. So you've answered that already.
I try and be efficient.
Brilliant. Okay, so that brings us neatly on then to we are running a little bit over, but hopefully people will stay on for the Q&A session, which, if you're all okay for time, we can do another sort of 5 minutes or so, if that's okay.
Yep.
Just because we have had a couple of questions come in. Let me just have if you can just bear with me. Let me just read them first. So there's a question here that says, with regards to the point Alex made about distributor unable to authorize, I'm just going to read the question out. We understand that this is the case for travel publishers, for example, the AA, Lonely Planet, etc. Often books correctly sent, or return books correctly sent, whether within IRI rules, are refused. These are rarely titles that have been tried before or may have had previous authorizations. Often, as it may only be 3 to 5 books, it's not worth the bother to get the rep to authorize, so we end up losing out. Any solutions? I think we might need more specifics to look into that example.
It is difficult with dated publications.
Yeah, yeah.
I think I always thought that obviously dated academic and travel publishing are the two areas that are difficult to participate in the IRI because they have different rules they need different rules based on when you can return them and so on. But you know, I'd like to think that there was a way that you know, if travel and dated publications could agree a kind of subset of rules that suit them, then maybe that would help them participate.
Exactly, and I wanted to make the point here. I talked about it in the introduction about the flexibility of IRI, in that it can allow for that flexibility. The only caveat would be that you don't just go in and randomly change the rules. That you do actually talk to your trading partners all the way along, and make sure that any changes that you want to recommend are agreed all the way along that supply chain. So yes, well,
we do have users, publishers, large and small publishers on batch returns that are using the web as their tool for using for creating the managing their returns requests, and they are able. It's not strictly IRI rules, but they're using that functionality to at least get the electronic and get some control over the messaging going back, and when the physical books are returned, they can still use that process, and it takes them 90% into the IRI, but then they're able to use their own rules. So that's already happening.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think, and I understand why people think it's the strict IRI rules, because we have sort of, well, think of a better phrase, but we've gone on about the rules for so long.
They have been mentioned a few times.
Yeah, just a few. So, but you know, rules are there to be flexed. So, and the standard does actually allow for that.
Yes.
So I just wanted to emphasise that point. Let me just see if we have any more questions in the chat box.
Can I clarify that, please? Because it was my question.
Yes.
Can I clarify that question? It isn't the small publishers that are doing this. It's the major publishers that you'll get half a dozen titles that are absolutely within the IRI initiative, but they just always fall through the net, and they say, we can't authorize these. Distributor are unable to authorize, when it's the publisher and the distributor together. I named the publishers, but Karina chose not to. I use them, fair enough. But it's the big boys, it's not the little boys that are doing this.
Yeah, I think without the specifics, I wouldn't want to comment on that without sort of specifics. So I think what we would need to look at is we'd have to have a bit of a dig. So to look at the ISBN, look at dates, look at messaging, look at the sort of the detail under the hood, as it were, before we give any answer, because there may be things behind the scenes that we're not aware of.
I would say that, sorry, Karina,
that's right.
that I've had this query directed to me a number of times, because the messages come through batch and we get the queries from the booksellers, and it is often the case that publisher, it may, doesn't feel that they can participate in the IRA because of the reasons I've mentioned earlier on, and that's the sort of people that we're looking at, trying to get them to maybe look at the problem and find a solution, and batch could be that solution. Even if their distributors fully automated and part of the IRI, we have had some publishers who are distributed by those major distributors that are that get to view the requests on the batch system, but have and then have the EDI messaging and the physical return of the book handled by the distributor. There are ways for those publishers that are not participating at all to potentially allow the automation by using the batch online process. So we've done this in the past with one or two publishers and their distributors. So there is an option for publishers to do partly a part automation of the process.
Does that help?
Except it's the main publisher, it's not the little publishers. It's when it's a big publisher.
Is it a publisher that
named as is the same as the distributor?
Right.
I'm trying to avoid the name of the publisher itself.
Well,
but
my solution
name are the same. Yeah. You can read between the lines there.
I think I can. If that individual imprint or publisher as part of a group can't be, because of whatever reasons they have, those titles are not able to be managed through the Industry Returns Initiative, and that distributor's back office system can't be flexible enough to allow the request to go through the automated process. We've discussed this with distributors before, and we have implemented it to some degree, and we certainly tested it, where that client publisher or that element of that publisher part of the group, their imprints are diverted and be able to be viewed on the batch website and kind of authorized manually on the website, but then the authorization gets fed through to the distributor system. There is a way that it can be done technically if there's a will from the participating companies to want to do it. So it is possible, and that's part of my message, is if there are publishers out there that are not participating, talk to us, because we think there is a way.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just about awareness, isn't it? So I think it would be good to follow up on that if we can.
I'm available.
Thank you. So
Karina, sorry,
yes.
may I just join in there just for a moment, because I think everything I endorse everything Simon's saying. I would say certainly from an Hachette point of view, because we are a new distributor, our systems are not, should we say, as mature and settled as some other systems. And certainly from our experience is we have had some issues with the data in our system and how it was interpreted. So I'm not saying it was the example is an Hachette one, but if it was, then it could be that has been resolved, because I certainly think we have worked through the various system issues we might have had.
Yeah, I think Adam, if you want to explore this more, if you would like to email me, that would be great, and then we can follow that up offline. I'm just conscious that this session is being recorded, so it would be nice to follow up with you on that separately, if that's okay.
Thanks.
Great, thank you. So we are over, but I'm just going to ask one or two quick questions. I think I'm going to ask this to probably to Ray, actually. Have you seen any impact on, because we're now in peak period of returns, according to one of your slides, have you seen any impact on the volumes of returns in relation to, has COVID had any impact?
Yeah, absolutely has. We saw quite, I mean, to be honest, we had possibly our biggest autumn peak that we've ever had, even when we had LBS and Book Brunch separately. And you could see quite a lot of situations where customers have ordered books in anticipating of being able to sell them before Christmas, and then finding out through lockdowns and things like that they haven't been able to, and we have seen quite a large increase in what's come back over this peak. Yeah,
I would have thought that. Yeah, definitely would have been the case. And I guess this is the question to all three speakers. What would you say, if you had to pick one thing, what would be the greatest or the biggest positive impact of IRI? So I'm going to go back to Alex, I think, to answer that first, and then to Ray and Simon.
Sorry, what was the question again?
What was if you had to narrow it down to one thing, what would you say the biggest positive of an automated return system such as IRI is?
Oh, I think just time, really. Time and ease. It just makes the whole process quicker, easier, and it's just more efficient all the way down the line.
Okay. Same question to Ray.
Yeah, I mean, I think I probably said it in my presentation. It is the efficiencies that it brings into the reverse logistics of that part of the supply chain.
Great, thank you. And Simon?
I'm jumping in again, efficient as ever. I'd say it's actually going back to why we got involved in the first place. People making returns and waiting for credits, it took forever. It was a real cash flow issue, and so I think that certainly for the bookseller, there's got to be that can remember that far back. The time it takes to send those back, and that money is just not available to them for months, and I think that made a big difference once that changed.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, I think it's fair to say we are now very firmly out of time, so I won't keep everyone any longer. What I will do is just very quickly say a few thank yous. Well, I'll sum up first, actually. So very quickly, I think it's fair to say that we've explored IRI. There seems to me obvious that the more organisations that use it, the better. We've heard from our speakers about how IRI has introduced, with the help of batch, etc., has introduced relatively seamless processing, speed, transparency, cost efficiencies. We've seen we've heard about the impact of how much more work would be involved if IRI wasn't being used, and just the sheer volumes of the returns that are coming through. If you can imagine those being handled manually, and going back to the days, the BIRI days, as Simon said, before IRI, and the fact that as has just been said, the cash flow issues have been greatly reduced, if not eliminated, for those people that are using IRI, which all brings us to basically being, as an industry, able to focus more on the selling of the book rather than the unselling of the book, which is what we all want to be doing, what we all want to be focusing on doing. So if we can make the returns process, which is that the book industry needs the returns process for various reasons, which I won't go into here. So if we can make that sort of unselling process as quick and efficient and seamless as possible, that's got to be a good thing. So I will just be saying my thank yous now. So I'd like to take this opportunity before we go to say a massive thank you to our speakers. On behalf of everyone here, I'd like to say thank you to Alex, to Ray and to Simon for taking the time to present to us all today and taking the time to prepare as well for us. And thanks also to John for representing our sponsors today, K&K Publishing. To you, our attendees, I'd like to say thank you as well. Please do stay in touch with us. And you can stay in touch with us by joining our brand new mailing list. The link's there on the screen for you. So you can, I say it's new, it's because we've introduced, you can manage your preferences a lot better by using that mailing list. So you can stay up to date with all our work, events, accreditations, training, etc., etc. So have a look. We'll make the presentation slideshow for this event available very shortly on our website, and there'll be a recording of the whole session posted to our YouTube channel very soon. So just leaves me to say thanks for attending, and we hope to see you at another BIC event in the very near future. Take care until then. Bye.